Tyren Walker. I'm a senior undergraduate at Bowie State University and a research assistant for the Virtual Reality Laboratory. And this is my presentation on data visualization of COVID-19 data and Baltimore crime data using Power BI and Tableau. Just a quick little overview of the topics that I'm going to be talking about today. Here's the abstract. Couple of goals for this project was to find out reasons as to why the black community is disproportionately impacted during the coronavirus pandemic, to find correlations between COVID-19 and crime in Baltimore, and to make visualizations in Tableau and Power BI based on data in Baltimore and COVID-19. Some factors found among African Americans that influenced the disproportionality were living in more crowded housing situations, working in consumer-facing service industries, having higher rates of pre-existing medical conditions, which is just poor health, and lack of insurance or consistent care source. All right, so I first utilized Power BI to create visualizations on COVID-19 data. Before the coronavirus was declared a pandemic, there were no cases of COVID-19. But when it was declared a pandemic in March 2020, the number of cases continued to rise each month for the rest of the year 2020. COVID-19 was in its very early stages, and measures and precautions were still being planned before being put into process to contain the virus. In this visual here, you can just see the number of cases by the month for the year 2020. Okay, and I created another visual in Tableau with data downloaded from COVIDnet that gave COVID-19 hospitalization data. This is just basically a line graph that details the rates of COVID-19 since the beginning of 2020 associated with hospital admissions according to race. The idea is that African Americans are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and it is supported through the number of blacks that continue to be admitted into hospitals at higher rates than other races. The red line represents blacks, the baby blue line representing Hispanics, the dark blue just being American Indian, orange being Asians, and the yellow color being whites. The graph shows that out of all races, blacks have been admitted into hospitals due to COVID-19 at the highest rate since the pandemic first started, with whites being admitted at the lowest rate. Next slide. This is a visualization that I made in Tableau as well. This is based on crime data in the city of Baltimore. This visualization was made to show the total number of each crime for each year prior to the coronavirus, and the totals for each year after the coronavirus arrived in the United States. The total number of crimes were very high compared to the more recent years, 2020 and 2021, where they took a dip, as can be shown in the visual. The bars for each year are represented by a different color, and each crime is represented on its own. Crimes like auto theft appear to happen at a much lower rate than crimes like burglary and common assault. Every crime shown in this figure dropped in the year 2020, which is due to COVID-19 and due to the statewide orders of people being told to stay home to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Slide. I created yet another visualization in Tableau, and it basically shows the total number of each crime by the month. Each year was represented on its own with line graphs to represent each type of crime and its total number of crimes for that year. Following the year 2019, crimes have been committed at lower rates than before the pandemic. There's a continual downtrend in the year's progress, with 2021 being the lowest it's ever been with all crimes since 2017. Even though crimes have dropped overall, you can kind of see that it somewhat masks the sudden increase during the break of summer 2020. Coincidentally, this was also when the murder of George Floyd occurred. Next slide. And now these are just my evaluations based on the the findings that I made on COVID-19 and crime. Um, there was a decrease in crime for all categories every year after the coronavirus arrived, while the COVID-19 cases continued to rise. Like as seen in the last slide, crimes of larceny from auto went from 5,703 to in 2019 to 3,624 in 2020. Even street robberies took a dip. It went from 3,372 in 2019 to just a little under 2,000 in 2020, which is the lowest it's been in the past 6 years. With everyone being told to stay home during the breakout of the virus, crime on the streets and in general have been at its lowest since 2014 across most categories. I utilized ArcGIS for this visual. This was created in Tableau, and it basically shows layers of representation of the neighborhoods in Baltimore. I felt like it was significant to create this visual as densely populated homes were one of the factors that heavily influenced African Americans' chances of catching COVID-19. Um, in this figure, you can see that it shows two layers, one of just the densely populated homes, along with the crimes and their totals committed in each neighborhood for a specific year. And I have it as far as the densely populated neighborhoods, whereas the darker the color, the area of the neighborhood is, the more densely populated it is. So you can see right there in the middle, some colors are darker, some a little lighter. Next slide. In this visual, it details the total number of each crime, the location that it occurred in, specifically in the neighborhood, with each crime being represented by different colors. So, for example, in the picture, you can see that the neighborhood Bel Air Edison has had a total of 8 incidents of robbery on the streets so far in the year 2021. Each circle represents a different crime and a location that it took place in. The user can flip through different years to see how much crime occurred for certain years. And it can help you track trends as far as what year had more crimes of this, what year had more crimes of that, where it decreased, where it increased, and all of that cool stuff. This is just another visual I made in Tableau. This is a double layered representation of crimes seen in the last slide, committed in each neighborhood, along with just the population of each neighborhood. And again, I use the color filter for the population. So areas that are darker blue color are more populated than areas that have a lighter blue color. Um, and yeah, this was also made using ArcGIS. Here I have a video just basically on my construction of this visualization in Power BI. And I'll go ahead and play that so you guys can look at that. Alright, here's something that I created in Tableau. I basically have two data sets uploaded into here. I have one with crime data in Baltimore, then I have another with just data on the neighborhoods in Baltimore. I can hide this first layer. So this layer right here is just showing the data on crimes in each neighborhood. Each circle represents a certain crime, and it even details the total number of incidents for that year for that certain neighborhood. So here for Mount Washington for the year 2020, you can see there were 3 total incidents of burglary so far. Over here, these yellow dots represent Chestwold for the year 2021 this year. And you can see there's a total of 3 incidents of aggravated assault, 4 incidents of larceny from auto, and just different types of crimes for each neighborhood. If I show this other layer, this just gives a nice outline of the city of Baltimore, and specifically this filter shows the population density of each neighborhood. And I have it catered towards a specific color. So the darker that the area is, basically the higher the population density is. I found this to be significant to represent because living in densely populated homes makes it harder to social distance, which can increase one's chances of catching COVID-19. So I felt like it was important to show this on in the city of Baltimore utilizing ArcGIS. And then when you show both layers, you can just kind of see them both represented at the same time. You can see how the crime sit in each neighborhood. You can even see, the population density of each neighborhood. I can also drag out different filters. So I'll drag out just population in general for each neighborhood. And now you can see the color switch to blue. And again, the darker the area, basically the higher the population it is. So you can see that while this being a very dark color, that there's a pretty high population in Frankfurt. And, yeah. All right. Then I went on to health and healthcare access. Factors such as densely populated areas, healthcare access, and pre existing medical conditions were explored, and I created visualizations to provide evidential support to my previous statements made. I created this visual in Power BI, also utilizing ArcGIS, to show a more detailed view of overcrowded homes in each state. In this figure, basically there were four different tabs that give details on each state. The percentage, each state's percentage of overcrowded homes. The first tab, it shows the percentage of Hispanic designated homes considered as overcrowded. The second tab detailing the percentages of blacks. The third detailing the percentages of whites. And the last tab detailing the percentage of homes considered as overcrowded for that state as a whole. Living in crowded homes, like I previously said, makes it harder to social distance. So when there's a lack of social distancing, there will inevitably be a rise in COVID-19 cases. In this figure, you can see I clicked on Texas, and first tab it was showing the percentage of crowded homes that are Hispanic designated as overcrowded. This next one, just another visualization I made on overcrowded homes, but this one just details specifically to black designated homes. In 2020, in the United States, 3.6 of occupied housing units designated as black or African American with one or more than one person per room. So if there was more than one person per room, then it was classified as an overcrowded home, basically. White designated housing units sat at 1.4% as far as them being uncrowded. And again, I filtered this one by the color. The darker the area of the state represents the higher the percentage of black designated homes that were considered overcrowded. You can see states like Montana and South Dakota had really high percentages of black designated homes considered overcrowded, with Montana being 12% and like South Dakota being almost 11%. And I felt like that was important just to show out of like all the black designated homes, how many of them were actually considered overcrowded, and which makes it harder to social distance. Being in poor health, like having high rates of existing medical conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, heart and liver and kidney diseases, can put one at an increased risk of severe illness if they get COVID-19. This visual was made in Power BI based on data that I downloaded from the CDC website, where an interview was conducted on health statistics that detailed the percentage of fair or poor health for adults aged 18 and over in the United States for the year 2019, which is the year obviously before the pandemic. This stacked bar chart shows the different races, blacks, whites, and Asians, and the percentages of these that were considered in poor or fair health at the time of the interview. Sorry about that. Blacks percentages sat at 20.4%, whites sat at 14.2%, and Asians sat at 9.3%. And this just goes to show how, out of all races, blacks have the highest percentage of being in fair or poor health, which puts them at a high risk for catching COVID-19. I created another visual in Power BI based on the same data. that I downloaded from the CDC, and this one just details how many uh, people interviewed had health insurance at the time of the interview. This stat column chart was created to show how the different races stack up as far as being insured. At the time of the interview that was conducted in 2019, 14.4% of blacks were uninsured, 13.1% of whites were uninsured, and 17.2% of Asians were uninsured. With blacks having the highest percentage of being uninsured, this too shows how blacks are disproportionately affected by COVID 19 due to the lack of healthcare access and the means of being able to get help or treatment in the face of the pandemic. Next thing I explored was the job industry. Based on a population survey of data from 2020 from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on annual averages of employed persons by detailed occupation between whites, blacks, Asians, and Hispanics. 9.7% of blacks made up all management, professional, and related occupations. 17% of all service occupations. They made up 12.5% of all sales and office occupations, and 7.5% of all natural resources, construction, and maintenance occupations, and 16.7% of all production, transportation, and material moving occupations. And what this basically tells you is that in 2020, the jobs that African Americans filled up the most consisted of customer facing jobs and jobs that dealt with transportation and handling of materials, all which tied to my previously stated facts that increase the chances of getting COVID 19, such as working in consumer facing service industries, which makes them more likely to use public transportation to get to work, which and therefore puts them at risk for increased exposure to COVID 19. And this is just a visual that I made in Power BI that just represents the percentage of blacks that make up that major detailed occupations. For the conclusion, COVID 19 did indeed have an impact on crime in the city of Baltimore. African Americans proved to live in more crowded housing situations, having higher rates of medical conditions, having the least access to health care, and account for having health insurance the least, all to which heavily correspond to why they are admitted the most into hospitals for COVID 19. Taking care of one's health better, living in better, with better living conditions, and better access to healthcare would drastically change things for the African American group. And there are hopes that necessary measures can be set in place to protect the African American community and help prevent them from being affected at much higher rates than other races. As my acknowledgments, I just want to give a special thanks to Dr. Sharma for the opportunity to be a part of the virtual reality laboratory group to conduct such extensive research on COVID 19 and crime in the city of Baltimore, along with the other resources that he provided. I also wanted to acknowledge the following grants that were given to me as far as being a part of this group, and also that an IEEE conference paper is also prepared based on this project if anyone wanted any more further exploration on it. And these are my references. And thank you all for watching my presentation.